So this past week, we continued our series in the book of Exodus, picking up the very end of chapter 6 and moving through the first half of chapter 7. Let's read this passage together, starting in Exodus 6, verse 28. Now when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You're to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment, I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring Israel out of it. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers and Egyptian magicians who also did the same thing by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. When we pick up in this passage, it's almost as if we have deja vu here at the very end of Exodus chapter 6. God is sending Moses to Pharaoh, and for now the third time in just 6 chapters, Moses says, but who am I that I should go? If you remember when God and Moses first talked at the burning bush, Moses asked this same question when God was commanding Moses to go free the Israelites. Moses began by saying, who am I that I should go? I'm nobody, right? I'm a murderer. I don't speak well. I've been kicked out of my home. Who am I that I should go? And in that encounter, God responded by saying, it's not about who you are. It's about who will be with you. And then Moses quickly followed that up by saying, okay, fine, if it's not about me, then who are you that you'll be with me? And that's where we get the famous passage where God gives Moses a name. Say, I am that I am will be with you. The everlasting, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the all-powerful God will be with you. It's so interesting that now for a third time, Moses still can't quite seem to get it through his head. He asks this question again, well, why would Pharaoh listen to me? Who am I that I should go? See, what the author of this text is doing is that he's making sure that we know that this story in the book of Exodus, that it isn't really a story about Moses at all, but it's a story about God. See, the author is intentionally highlighting the shortcomings and the failures and the weaknesses of Moses so that there can be no doubt in our mind that the miracles and the wonders and the power that's on display in the coming chapters, that has nothing to do with Moses and his greatness and goodness, has everything to do with God. It's interesting. I think you and I can relate to Moses a lot in this passage. Maybe you find yourself like I do sometimes asking this question time and time again of, well, God, who am I? Or God, who are you? Or God, will you really be with me? Will you really be faithful? Will you really show up in my life? I'm nobody. I'm a failure. I don't have what it takes. See, we can fall into these patterns of doubt and of fear and of anxiety. And those patterns can disconnect us from the reality of God and his kingdom and his goodness. But see, there's good news for us in this passage. The amazing thing is that even Moses, in light of all his shortcomings, in light of all his failures, he murdered an Egyptian. He fled from his home, right? He questions God time and time again. If you know what happens in the rest of the book of Exodus, you know that God still shows up and uses him in incredible and powerful ways. And God wants to do the same thing through you and I, because it's not about us. It's not about what we bring to the table. It's not about our gifting or our skill set. It's about God's power and God's goodness and ultimately God's love for you and I and the way he wants to move in us and work through us. So Moses and Aaron, they're finally sent to go before Pharaoh, and they do this wondrous sign. Aaron throws down his staff, and it becomes this monstrous snake that swallows up the snakes of all the other magicians and wise men of Pharaoh. But then there's this interesting line here at the end of our passage in verse 13. It says, "Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said." Now, if you're like me, when you first read these passages, that language, that imagery, when God says he's going to make Pharaoh's heart hard, see, that always bugged me a little bit. Because at first glance, it kind of makes God seem mean, right? Like, why would he make Pharaoh's heart hard? Why would he make it so that Pharaoh doesn't listen the first time? And we know all of these plagues that are going to come down on Pharaoh are horrible, right? They ultimately end with the firstborn child of every Egyptian dying. That's not a good thing. That's a horrible thing. That's a painful thing. So why would God harden Pharaoh's heart? You see, we get hints as we read this passage. Ultimately, the same way that God wanted Moses to know that it's not about him, God wants to reveal his goodness and his power and his strength to the Egyptians as well. See, if Pharaoh had been so impressed by Aaron turning his staff into a snake and he would have let the Israelites go right then and there, Pharaoh would have never come to know the goodness of God. The Egyptians would have never come to know the power of God. They would have just been impressed by this man, Moses and Aaron. They would have continued to move forward in their own polytheistic culture, their culture of having many gods without ever really knowing the one true God. But what we come to see by the end of all of these plagues that will unfold in the coming chapters of Exodus, Pharaoh and the Egyptian people, there's no way for them to deny the power of God, the power of Yahweh, the great I am. And ultimately, we know that knowing God, having a relationship with God, experiencing God's love is better than any physical thing that this world or this life could ever offer us. So it's actually out of God's kindness and mercy that Pharaoh's heart is hardened, because it's through this difficult path that Pharaoh and the Egyptian people will come to know the presence, the power, the goodness, the strength of God, the Lord Almighty. In your small groups, I want you to talk a little bit about some ways in which you resonate with Moses, in which maybe you ask questions like, who am I and who are you? And then I want you to unpack this concept of God hardening Pharaoh's heart and maybe allowing bad things to happen for a redemptive purpose. These are difficult questions, but it's important that we talk about them, that we discuss them, that we think deeply and prayerfully on them.